You have written that the international community, quote, has all of the means necessary to defeat the ISIL threat it faces. And you've written that, quote, no boots on their ground means more blood on ours. Are you advocating a Western military ground response to ISIL, which most of the West leaders have ruled out, and which many experts on ISIL say is what they want?
No, this is not what I said. When I said no boots on their ground means more blood on our ground, the boots are not the boots of the French and of the American soldiers. When I said that 1 year ago, I meant the Kurds, I meant the Iraqi armies, and I meant a support by our special forces, by the weapons of the West, by the money of the West, a support to these fighters.
You have been a big supporter of the Peshmerga, the Kurdish militia fighters. Aren't people like yourself guilty of also turning a blind eye to the human rights abuses, the alleged war crimes carried out by the Peshmerga too, which only helps ISIL recruit amongst Iraqi Sunni Arabs?
I did not witness these human rights abuses. I did not witness what you are saying about.
It's not what I'm saying. Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch has documented abuses by Peshmerga fighters against Iraqi Sunni Arabs.
Okay. Human Rights Watch seemed to document them. I was not witness of that. I was present in the Battle of Bashika. What I saw is that the people belonging to ISIS or having supporters ISIS are not welcome in the future of Bashika. This is another story. It is not ethnic cleansing as I have read here or there.
And you talk about being a critic of radical Islam. Here's what I don't get. French liberal interventionists such as yourself are happy to support or empower, quote-unquote, Islamist fighters in Libya or Syria or elsewhere, but at home you call for crackdowns on political Islam, on quote-unquote Islamism or Salafism. Do you not see a contradiction between supporting or empowering these forces abroad, but railing against them at home?
I never supported, neither in Syria nor in Libya, radical Islamist fighters. I supported Democrats. I prayed and begged my government to support, between Bashar and jihadists, this force which existed 3 years ago, who are the Democrats.
And in France, which has been the subject of horrific attacks in recent years, is one of the top European contributors per capita of foreign fighters to groups like ISIL. In France itself, do you see any contradiction between being a champion of liberal values and yet supporting a French state of emergency, a domestic crackdown that's been heavily criticised by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, by the UN? You've said France must do more surveillance, must ban hate preachers. Whatever happened to Je suis Charlie and the great French liberté?
Je suis Charlie is still there. State of emergency is something else. It is a way to protect the civilians of every faith, Christian civilians, Muslim civilians, French Muslims, French Christians, French Jews, against the pure plague and horror of jihadism. This is a state of emergency. And as the word says, it is provisional. It will last as long as the threat of jihadism will last. And no one in France, in the democratic camp, lives easily with this perspective. But alas, in this asymmetric war, it is a necessity.
When you say it's war, as you did after the Paris attacks, and in relation to the homegrown attackers, isn't that hyperbole and isn't that counterproductive? You're giving these thugs, the Charlie Hebdo attackers, the Paris attackers, who were petty criminals, ex-drug dealers, ex-convicts, misfits. You're giving them what they crave, warrior status, martyr status, rather than treating them as the lowlives, the sadistic killers that they were.
It is a new sort of war. It is an irregular war, asymmetric war, but it is a sort of war against civilians. And I oppose the war against civilians in Syria. I would oppose the same way in France. And what happened in Promenade des Anglais was a war against civilians of Nice.
When the Kouachi brothers, who are kind of misfits, whatever, ex-convicts, or the Abdesalam brothers in Paris, when they carry out these horrific murderous attacks, and afterwards they're dubbed holy warriors by their enemies, that's what they want. You're granting ISIL's narrative to them. You're giving them the holy warrior status that they crave. You're playing their game, aren't you?
You're not worried about that? You are not completely wrong. This is why, yes, of course. This is why I recommended in a lot of articles to leave them to the night, not to give their names, not to fall into the narrative of their life. This is true, that there is a sort of complaisance, a sort of goodwill in telling the storytelling of their life. This is a big mistake. But to oppose these sort of attacks, by all means, not to tolerate them, not to excuse them, the worst in this situation, there is two terrible attitudes. One is to excuse, to say that they do that, they do crime, they commit crime because they are poor, because they had a difficult childhood, and so on. This is a huge mistake. Another mistake is to turn them into heroes of new TV shows. Okay. This is right, and that is why.
And some would say a third mistake is to treat them as warriors rather than criminals. Some would say a third mistake is to treat them as warriors rather than criminals.
The Nazis, before becoming warriors, were also very often criminals. The SS and the SA.
These lone wolves are not the Nazis. These lone wolves are not the Nazis. You're giving them a status they do not deserve.
Because you think that Nazi is a very welcome status?
No, because I think the Nazis were able to conquer most of Europe. I don't think the Abdeslam brothers or the Kouachi brothers came close to conquering even France.
The Nazis before Hitler coming to power were not able to take Europe. But this is not the point. The point is that this will of crime, this mix of gangsterism and ideology, this is very common from Stalinism to Nazism to now jihadism to this sort of totalitarian crime. It is one common point.